Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA with my good friend and colleague, Jay Rosen. The weather here in Houston this week has been crap. We've had thunderstorms every day. Lake Fox in my backyard is at an all-time high. So, Jay, I hope you can tell me it never rains in Southern California, that it's not raining.
It's not raining, but we share your misery, and it's a bit overcast, if that helps.
And we have to acknowledge the Houston Astros, who rolled into Fenway Park on a 2-game winning streak and rolled out with getting hammered. So congratulations to your Bo Sox.
Thank you, Tom.
Yes. So, Jay, we had some interesting things happen this week. Why don't we shake it up and have you start?
Okay. So first thing I'm going to throw out there was this great rant by Roy Snell. And basically he was talking about how a section of the FCPA Act was written and how the legalese is almost so unintelligible. And he went on to say that the rule of law is confusing. Uncommon words are used to say common things in Latin is frequently used, despite the fact that 99% of the readers do not speak Latin. And Adam Turtletop, who's also with the SCCE, said, you could argue that the job of a compliance officer is to serve as a translator. And you can imagine how that resonated with me because of my day job. And so a compliance officer's job is to make complex, hard to pronounce, foreign sounding stuff as easy to read as a McDonald's menu. And, you know, this is something that really hits home about what a compliance practitioner has to do, that not only do we have to translate from English into foreign languages, but we need to translate from English into English. So that was one of the top things that kind of hit my radar this week. And we should, when this posts, do we have links to any of the articles that we quote, or is that something we can do?
I'd have to explore how to do that. I think I can do it on YouTube. But I'd have to, I know there's a notes section. Maybe I can do that in the notes. I can talk about our topic, so I don't see why I couldn't post a link.
All right. But if not, if anybody wants to get a link on that, you can find it directly at the SCC website, which is available on multiple social network platforms.
And if somebody ever got good on Blab, I know there's a way to actually link to those things while you're talking during the Blab.
Okay.
So, but that would require a level of sophistication that's beyond my limited technical competence at this point.
Sounds like the gauntlet has been thrown down.
So, yeah, you know, typical non-lawyer ragging about lawyers. This time it's about language. He cites a 1977 statute and says, oh, it's not up to 2016 standards. Yeah, go figure. Of course, it's written in legalese. That's how laws are written. It's written in legalese for a reason. There's a reason we're the biggest clothes shop in the world, and that's an important thing because we want to have our quality high. That's why you have unions. Jesus. So, you know, feeling a little Howard Sklar coming on, but he and I are actually going to do a full unfair and unbalanced on that subject. So teaser for those who might want to hear me defend the greatest profession in the history of the world ever going forward.
Screenwriting?
No. Mr. Translations himself. So, but some of his points were worth some mention, because one of the jobs I often have is to take a gold standard, absolutely first-class compliance program written by lawyers for lawyers and translate it into English. So there is something of that as well. But plain English for lawyers is something that has been around since I've been practicing. We've been trying to bring things down to civilian levels of intelligence. I'm not sure we've achieved that. Nevertheless, it seems to be where the profession might be going in the future. And maybe one day, let's throw the gauntlet your way, there'll be an algorithm that can translate legalese into human being language, but I doubt it. So anyway, it was he's been poking me about that article all week because he asked me my thoughts, and I told him I think it's a rant, basically by a whiny old lady complaining. And he posted the part that said, I think it's a rant. He didn't add the rest. So he's been poking me about that all week with all the positive comments he's gotten. So I guess I'm going to have to stand up for my brethren, and we'll see how I can do. So let me throw off in an interesting rant in a different direction from a place I would not have expected it. Slate Online Magazine, of which I am a huge, huge, huge fan, had a piece yesterday which actually ranted about compliance training, the complete idiocy and ineffectiveness of compliance training. It was really surprising to see that in Slate. Typically, it's not something they go into the weeds on. And while I disagree with about 99% of what the reporter had said, she did have one point which I thought was worthwhile, which is if you simply take training as your entire compliance program, it's going to fail, because training is one component, and it's a holistic, a compliance program is a holistic approach because it's a business process. So you have to have tone at the top. You have to have written policies and procedures which set the standards. You got to have a code of conduct. You got to figure out where your risk of violating those written standards are, and you have to train on that. Then you have to measure that and incentivize people to reward or disincentivize the behavior that you're trying to impact. Then you have to monitor that going forward. And she picked training out simply, and actually even picked it out of the sentencing guidelines to say, well, training's not effective because bribery and corruption still happen. Yeah, wake up, smell the roses. So you can't pick any of those out. It's an entire program, and it's an entire business process. So I have been challenged by several of my colleagues to write a response piece. So I guess people are looking to me to respond to this. So I may have to do that.
Well, it looks like you've got something to write on the airplane ride to D.C. Over the weekend, right? Yep. You want to hit on that for a sec?
Sure. Jay and I are both attending Compliance Week 2016. Begins next, formally opens next Sunday night with a cocktail reception, I believe at 6 p.m. at the Mayflower Hotel. The events, the conference is Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday morning. So I hope that you, if you're going to attend, you might say hello to us. We're going to do a special This Week in FCPA Compliance Week 2016 episode and wrap up. I thought we'd go live from DC next week, Jay, and see what our impressions of the conference were. It's going to be interesting this year. We've got kind of a new regime at Compliance Week, so we'll see how they may want to go in a little bit different direction, if any. So I'm going to be speaking on reflecting on doing business in Cuba, and I'm leading a panel of CCOs who have gone through enforcement actions, but we're not going to focus on the enforcement actions. We're going to focus on how do you do remediation during the pendency, legal word, spoiler alert, legal word, the pendency. That means during, for you people who don't understand. And unfortunately, yes, I knew you would, as Mr. Translations, you probably had an algorithm for that as well. So looking forward to seeing a lot of old friends at Compliance Week. In addition to the presentations, it's there's going to be a Monday night cocktail reception. There'll be the way the Mayflower set up is they have a long hall where the vendors set up, and it's a great place to find out about what's available in terms of services or products in the compliance space. Everyone's there to share information, so it can be a very helpful experience, whether you're a 25-year compliance practitioner or it's your first year. And if it's your first year, what I might suggest is what you wanted to talk about next. So why don't you talk about our good friend Samantha and what she put up on the SCCE website?
Sure. So Samantha is, as Tom said, a good friend of both of ours, and we met initially at a Compliance and Ethics Institute about 3 or 4 years ago. And this year, Samantha's really taken it upon herself to really share the wisdom and her experiences, what it's like attending a conference. And she, in conjunction with the folks at SCCE, put together this really wonderful little animated short that talks about 10 tips on what you should do for attending either the SCCE Compliance and Ethics Institute or any type of networking event. So it's real solid information. And one of the things that Samantha talks about is putting together an orphans dinner. And this is something that I've really practiced a lot the last few years. So the first night when you get in, reach out to some colleagues who you may be linked in with, but you don't know really well, and see if you can all get together and grab dinner. Another thing I'd like to suggest about the SCCE event that's coming up in September is that a great event to really participate in is there's a community volunteer event, which happens on the Saturday before the conference begins. And it's a real amazing way to meet 30 or 40 people who are just there in T-shirts, no name tags, so you don't know if they're a CECO or you don't know if they're just a compliance grunt, but you get sweaty, you get dirty, you accomplish something that's great that you feel good about. And now you have 30 or 40 new friends who you get to look at and talk to, and they really become touch points over the conference. So great work from Samantha and SCCE there. And I'm just wondering how I can go into 2D someday, because I'd like to get my own animated short.
Well, like myself, it seems to me that many of your social media efforts are driven by your continuing attempts to impress your daughters. So the only difference is I only have one daughter, so I only have one to impress. But absolutely, and the way I actually contacted her, because I was so intrigued on how she did it. She worked with SCCE itself to create that with an animation program. And so it really struck me as a way that you might be able to do some very effective eye-catching training inside of your organization. But let me talk about, let me move to the SCCE Compliance and Ethics Institute for another plug. In addition to the Saturday work that Jay talked about, on Sunday morning they have two events called Speed Networking and Speed Mentoring. And these are events where you have, I think it's 5 to 7 minutes, if I recall, in front of a person. So, for instance, myself, I would sign up as a mentor, and then people would rotate through my station, and the same with networking and marketing. But what I found was that it's not so much mentoring in terms of I'm going to set myself up as a mentor for a mentee. It's people came with specific questions. And so if you have questions that you've been thinking about or don't have answers to about your compliance program, sign up for one of those events and just say, here, I've got this question. What do you think? And you can have 6 or 7 opinions in 30 minutes. So it's a pretty powerful way to communicate and garner some more information. So another plug for SCCE, the Compliance and Ethics Institute. If you have not been, it's really the annual event for the compliance practitioner here in the U.S. It's relatively low priced for one of these events, and this year it's going to be in Chicago. So, Jay, we just had another event in London, Worldwide Anti-Corruption Conference, and I had to Matthew Stevenson, who writes at the Global Ethics and Global Anti-Corruption blog, wrote a great 2-part summary about it. And this was obviously came out after the Panama Papers, and it had been set up by David Cameron about a year ago. And you and I talked on the last Blab post about is Cameron uniquely suited to attack offshore entities in the same way only Nixon can go to China. And so we played around with that, but there was Summit had a final communique, and I'd like to read the 4 points that came out of the communique, because I think they may guide a lot of the regulatory and legislation we see going forward. And then people like you and I are going to have to, what was your word again? Was it translate? Legalese?
Yeah, translate. That's the word of the day. If you say translate, win a prize.
Oh, okay. So translate. So we may have to translate that into an effective business process. But let me read the 4 highlighted areas from the final communique. Number one, increase access to information on the true beneficial owners of companies and possibly other legal entities through central registers. 2, increase transparency in public procurement. 3, strengthening the independence and capacity of national audit institutes and publicizing audit results, and more generally increasing physical transparency in other ways. And then 4, not only encouraging whistleblowers, but strengthen their protection in various forms from retaliation and develop systems to ensure that law enforcement takes prompt action in response to these whistleblower complaints. And if we start to get movement on really any of those 4 on a worldwide basis, I think it's really going to help the shine the light of day into an area of corporate shell ownership that has been a bane for many, many years. Certainly in the anti-corruption world, it's a problem where people will not only hide money, but will hide their true ownership, so that if you think you're doing business with someone, it may turn out you're doing business with a government official, and the payments might violate the FCPA. So very interesting that this conference, although in the works for over a year, was within weeks of the Panama Papers and within weeks of David Cameron having to announce that he was the beneficiary of an offshore trust set up through the Panamanian law firm in question. So interesting results from the summit conference. I think a lot of momentum, a lot of people energized. I hope we can keep moving this forward. So any thoughts from the translations perspective?
Well, I just want to say that, that train keeps rolling this week. I happened to see a webinar earlier in the week with our good friend Mike Volkov and Bill Hauserman from Bureau Van Dyke. And Volkov actually said that, the 2 biggest words for this year are going to be beneficial ownership. So it really seems that the Panama Papers has really spurred people on, with not only people leaving governments and having some real big name people being involved, but it really seems that proverbial light bulb has just gone off about beneficial ownership. And, one of the questions is, in the past, there's been tick box, due diligence. There's been due diligence that's been very low level using, the lists that are out there. And I think people are really starting to figure out now that there is no excuse for not rolling up your sleeves and digging down. And that leads me to another conference to speak about. A week ago Friday, Protivity put together an event in New York City. Our good friend Scott Moritz and his colleagues and Chuck DeRoss was there. Some people from the government were speaking. And, one of the things that he addressed specifically with this beneficial ownership is that, you can get to a point where you do your due diligence and then, as you've said many times before, document. So you have to really say why you're making decisions at a certain point in an investigation, why you choose to go forward or why you choose to don't go forward. And, he's kind of leading up to that point of McNulty's maxim about, what did you find? When you found it, what did you do about it? And then how did that remediation go forward? So these 2 ideas about beneficial ownership and digging deeper really seem to inform the first half of FCPA Inc. 2016. And I'm really interested to see what kind of solutions come out of the vendor community and whether this momentum continues forward.
It was interesting that Volkov had those thoughts, and I think he's really onto something. So we're just going to have to see where that might move forward. We had a couple of other interesting things I wanted to throw out. We've got about looks like 10 minutes left. The first one is FINRA, another regulatory agency focusing on financial institutions, had a fine. It levied a fine, an agreed fine on the financial services company Raymond James. But the thing I wanted to concentrate on, Jay, was that the chief compliance officer was specifically sanctioned in this, and sanctioned with banning from the industry for 3 years, fine of $25,000. Although the CCO retired. So the ban may be superfluous. Nevertheless, this continues a trend that started last year with the SEC fining or sanctioning 2 CCOs in the financial services industries. Now, I recognize this is different from anti-corruption, but in many ways, the SEC and even perhaps FINRA are more on the cutting edge because of their regulatory oversight on financial services. And I read the order yesterday, and the CCO was sanctioned basically for 2 broad categories. One was not putting a robust enough program in place, compliance program, I should say. And then 2, the second was when red flags were raised around a specific transaction involving a Panamanian shell company. Those red flags were not investigated or cleared. So this is really the first time we've seen, or I have seen, a CCO sanctioned for conduct that, in my mind, was not criminal. It certainly may have been negligent. It may have been something less than negligent. It did not appear from the order that it was intentional, although the order is a product of negotiation. So we don't have the full facts involved. But if we're moving towards a standard where CCOs can be civilly sanctioned for negligent conduct, that could bleed over to the FCPA space, and that could be a significant turn of events for many of our friends.
So I'd like to take that idea just about the financial community, and there was a piece that I picked up from Jack Kelly from the Compliance Search Group, and he had picked up something from the London Times saying 42,000 financial compliance jobs have been relocated away from New York City and London to cheaper cities and countries. And the point of his blog there was that there may be a situation now where the folks who have training and experience in financial compliance are now going to be replaced by 23-year-olds graduating from college who are earning half as much. And Jack has some dire predictions that in the next 5-10 years from now, mid-level professionals who earn a base of $150,000 plus bonus are going to be replaced with new people at $30,000 a year. And his fear is that this is going to lead to even more breakdowns on the financial compliance front. Any thoughts on that?
I guess kind of 2 thoughts. They may seem inconsistent, but maybe I can tie them together. The first is it doesn't really surprise me about the not perhaps offshoring is too strong a word, but moving to newer or more junior employees to do this. But if we consider compliance as becoming part of a business process, that these people with the title of compliance practitioner, compliance professional, compliance something in their job title or description may be closer akin to process analysts. And if you have a process that is robust, both the process itself being robust, but also a second set of eyes, perhaps a third set of eyes, oversight, coupled with a technological component that hits certain tripwires, that may be a positive for moving compliance really into the DNA of a business, so that particularly in the financial services space, we can focus on that, because the tripwires are fairly well known. Their lack of knowledge of owners, their rounded amounts of transfers on a regular basis. They are amounts that are at or just below what would generate a suspicious activity report, or routine amounts of the same or similar amount. So 50,000, 50,000, 50,000, 50,000, 50,000, 50,000, that sort of thing. And that sort of tripwires lends itself to a technological, at least tickler system. And then if you have a compliance analyst who picks this up and can route this up to a more senior person for further investigation, that may actually help drive compliance into the system. So although I certainly don't want, and don't start barking, guys, the garbage men are here, so I may have to be protected from killer garbage men. It may be that compliance becoming more of a business process, it makes sense to have people who are doing things at a lesser salary than a can I even say high price lawyer? Not sure.
Do you have a translation for that or not?
Yeah, we'll see. So we just have to see which way it goes. Now let me see where I could tie that back to the FCPA, because in the release of the pilot program by the department in late March, I believe, or April, there was a third part. The pilot program had three parts: self-disclosure, cooperation during investigation, and then remediation. And one of the specific points on remediation was the compensation paid to the compliance professionals in the organization and their ability to have upward mobility within the corporation, not simply limited to the compliance function. So, maybe the DOJ is considering that, and they would look very askance at a company that dumped all of their compliance work to junior associates when they really needed a high-priced lawyer involved.
So I guess it'd be fair to say that in Houston this morning, the coffee cup is half full with regard to the fact of bringing in more junior resources to help out to get compliance in the DNA.
Well, I can certainly see that if viewed as an overall move towards putting compliance into the business units themselves, it might not be a negative, but could depend on how it goes.
So we're getting close. Two more things I want to throw out quickly and tee you up. Russian doping at the Sochi Olympics? Gambling in Casablanca? Who knew?
No.
All right, going to say that. That's the Eastern District of New York. We'll pick that up another time. Last week, I know you gave a shout out to Jay Martin, and I just wanted to find out how was the Gerber event and any closing thoughts from that.
Sure. I guess the question I would ask you to consider is, what the bleep is the Eastern District of New York doing investigating Russian athletes for Olympic doping in London? And we'll leave it at that. A lot of other things going on in this country that may or may not be more important. The Gerber dinner for Jay Martin, honoring Jay Martin, was great. We had a huge turnout. The weather cleared just in time for most people to get there. We had a few, including our featured speaker, who were plane delayed and didn't make it in time to give their formal remarks, but went over quite well. Jay and his wife were incredibly touched. The two most significant things I thought were the following. One, they asked, the president of Gerber asked for a picture of all of the people who had worked for Jay Martin over the years, and I think there were 25 in the picture, and that was out of a crowd of about 150. I mean, the amount of compliance talent he has generated to this city and across the globe is just incredible. And that picture alone, to me, spoke to why Jay Martin deserved to be honored with our first Betty Steed Award. Great.
And so, as we said, we're going to go live from DC, or are we going to tape it and play it back on this time slot next week? What are we
We're going live, baby.
We're going live without a net.
Going live without a net, Tom Brady, the whole thing. We may just have
I think we need to do it from Shelley's back room. What do you think about that?
I'm not sure the ambient noise would allow that, but maybe we could go for a special afternoon podcast, blab session, I should say.
All right. Well, Tom, as always, it's been fun. Have a great weekend, and look forward to seeing you in DC next week.
All right. Take care. Safe travel.
Thanks. You too.